1943. A Nazi steps off a train in Texas. The air hits him first, a thick, wet blanket of heat, so different from the crisp continental climate of his homeland. The light is blinding, the sun a merciless white orb in an impossibly vast sky. Then comes the smell, dust, dry grass, and the faint, unfamiliar scent of crude oil. He is one of thousands, a sea of field gray uniforms now faded and worn, shuffling under the watchful eyes of American guards with rifles slung casually over their shoulders. They are Kriegsgefangenen, prisoners of war. Their new home is not a grim stone fortress, but a sprawling complex of low wooden barracks surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire in the heart of the Lone Star State. This is Camp Hearne, one of nearly 50 such camps scattered across Texas, a state that would ultimately hold more Axis POWs than any other in America. The sheer scale of the POW program in the United States is a testament to a logistical challenge born of Allied success. Following the surrender of the Afrika Korps in Tunisia in May 1943, hundreds of thousands of German and Italian soldiers were shipped across the Atlantic to prevent them from being liberated by Axis forces and to alleviate the burden on British prison systems. Under the strictures of the 1929 Geneva Convention, these men were to be housed, fed, and cared for far from the battlefields of Europe and North Africa. Texas, with its wide open spaces, established military bases, and a climate deemed suitable for outdoor work, became a primary receptacle for this human cargo. Camps like Hearne, Mejia, Hereford, and Huntsville sprang up, often repurposed from civilian conservation corps sites. They were not designed to be brutal. By all accounts, conditions were, for the most part, remarkably good, especially when compared to the horrors of the Eastern Front or even the privations facing civilians in war-torn Germany. The men received rations on par with American garrison troops, access to medical care, and were allowed to organize educational courses, orchestras, and sports leagues. The camps developed their own micro-societies with internal hierarchies, black markets, and fierce political divisions between hardened Nazis and increasingly disillusioned anti-Nazis. But for some, the relative comfort was a gilded cage. The humiliation of capture, the boredom of confinement, and the relentless, aching distance from home festered in certain minds. Among these men was a young, resourceful, and deeply determined private named Georg Gärtner. Gärtner was not a fanatical Nazi. Born in 1920 in Schweidnitz, Silesia, he was a sports-minded youth who had been conscripted into the Afrika Korps, trained as a mountain trooper in the 104th Panzer Grenadier Regiment. Captured in Tunisia, he had already experienced the tedium of transit camps in North Africa before the long, uncertain voyage to America. He arrived at Camp Hearne, designated as POW Camp number 382 in the latter part of 1943. Camp Hearne was a major hub, one of the largest POW camps in the country, at one point holding over 4,800 men. It was a city behind wire, complete with its own newspaper, a 500-seat theater, and multiple sports fields. Yet, beneath this veneer of orderly captivity, a secret war was being waged. The camp was intensely politicized. A powerful contingent of pro-Nazi NCOs and officers, many from the captured German submarine U-505, enforced strict discipline among the prisoners. They ran a covert camp police force that intimidated, beat, and, in at least one documented case, murdered fellow prisoners suspected of being disloyal or anti-Nazi. The victim was Johannes Kunze, a soldier accused of being an informant who was brutally beaten to death by his comrades in November 1943. This event cast a long, dark shadow over Hearne, proving that the war and its fanaticism had followed them across the ocean. For Georg Gärtner, this internal strife was a secondary concern. His obsession was escape. He was not motivated by ideology, but by a profound fear of what awaited him if he were repatriated to a Germany that was clearly losing the war. His home region of Silesia was directly in the path of the advancing Soviet Red Army. The stories of Soviet brutality were rampant, and the thought of being sent back into that maelstrom was terrifying. He believed his only chance was to disappear into America itself. He began to plan with meticulous care. He closely observed the routines of the guards, the patterns of patrols, the blind spots in the perimeter lighting. He hoarded canned food from his Red Cross parcels, saved money from the small canteen scrip he earned working on local farms, and acquired a set of civilian clothes, likely through barter or theft from a laundry detail. He studied maps of Texas and learned key phrases of English. His plan was audacious. He wouldn't just break out of the camp, he would melt into American society. The night of September 21st, 1945, provided his opportunity. The war in Europe had been over for nearly 5 months. For most POWs, this was a period of anxious waiting, a limbo before repatriation. For Gärtner, it was a final window. The camp's security, while still present, may have relaxed slightly with the end of hostilities. That night, under the cover of darkness, he made his move. Using wire cutters, the acquisition of which was a feat in itself, he snipped a hole in the chain-link fence near the camp's swimming pool and slipped out into the freedom of the Texas night. He was not the first nor the last to escape from American POW camp. Over 2,000 attempted escapes were recorded during the war, the vast majority of which ended in recapture within days. But Gärtner was different. He had escaped at a unique historical moment. The massive American war machine was demobilizing. Public attention had shifted from Nazis to the new Cold War threat of the Soviets. The FBI, which had primary jurisdiction over escaped POWs, was overwhelmed, and its search for Gärtner, while initially active, soon lost its intensity. He was just one more name on a long list. He vanished. His first move was to hop a freight train, the classic method of the American hobo. He traveled west, putting as much distance as possible between himself and Hearne. He ended up in Deming, New Mexico, a small railroad town. Here, the young German, with limited English, had to reinvent himself. He took on the identity of a Danish migrant worker named Dennis Wiles. He claimed to be from Europe, which was true, and said he was seeking work, which was also true. It was a plausible cover. In the post-war Southwest, there were many displaced persons and migrant laborers trying to build new lives. He found work as a ranch hand, his youth and physical fitness serving him well. He was quiet, kept to himself, and worked hard. He moved from job to job, always careful, always listening, always learning. He perfected his English, slowly shedding his German accent for a more neutral American cadence. He followed the weather, working construction in the summers and heading to the ski resorts of the Rocky Mountains in the winters, where he became a skilled ski lift operator and even a ski instructor. He was a ghost. a man living in the negative space of society. He avoided deep relationships, shunned official documentation, and lived in constant low-grade fear. A traffic stop, a workplace accident, a routine background check for a better job, any of these could be his undoing. He became a consummate actor, playing the part of Dennis Wiles so convincingly that he almost began to believe it himself. He followed the news, watching the Cold War intensify, the Berlin Wall go up, the space race unfold, all from the sidelines, a spectator to the history of his former enemy. He settled for a time in Colorado, and in a twist of fate that seems pulled from a spy novel, he even fell in love. He met Jean Clark, a divorced mother of two. They began a relationship, and for the first time since his escape, Georg Gärtner allowed himself to build something resembling a normal life. He was a devoted partner to Jean and a father figure to her children. They moved to California together. But the shadow of his past was inescapable. He could never marry Jean, as that would require presenting a birth certificate and social security number, things he did not have. His entire life with her was built on the foundation of a lie, a secret he dared not share, not even with the woman he loved. The pressure was immense, a psychological prison of his own making that was, in many ways, more confining than Camp Hearne had ever been. For 40 years, Dennis Wiles lived this double life. The FBI had long since closed his file, assuming he had likely slipped across the border into Mexico, or perhaps even died. He was a forgotten man from a forgotten conflict. But Gärtner himself never forgot. He followed news from Germany, and as the decades passed, a strange thing happened. His fear of repatriation faded. The Soviet Union was no longer the immediate monolithic threat it once was. West Germany was a prosperous Allied nation. The war crimes he feared being implicated in were distant history. The motivation for his grand escape had evaporated. In the early 1980s, a new fear began to take its place. A popular television show, the FBI, often featured stories of Nazi war criminals being hunted down decades after the war. Shows like this, along with news reports about the Simon Wiesenthal Center's activities, terrified Gärtner. He was not a war criminal, but he was a former Nazi soldier living under an assumed identity. Would anyone believe his story? Or would he be branded a second Eichmann? This fear culminated in 1985. The publicity surrounding the 40th anniversary of the end of World War II and the capture of Nazi war criminals like Klaus Barbie made him increasingly paranoid. He decided he could no longer live in the shadows. He needed to come in from the cold, but on his own terms. He contacted a well-known journalist, Peter Horisky of the Sacramento Bee, and through him, the FBI. On October 24, 1985, 40 years and 1 month after he had cut that fence in Texas, Georg Gärtner walked into an FBI office in Sacramento and surrendered. He was not arrested. The statute of limitations for escaping from a POW camp had long expired. He was not a war criminal. A thorough investigation confirmed he had been a low-level conscript with a clean record. The legal case was, for all intents and purposes, non-existent. The man who had been Dennis Wiles for longer than he had been Georg Gärtner now had to reclaim his identity. It was a complex and surreal process. With the help of a lawyer, he began the lengthy immigration process to become a legal resident of the United States, the country he had illegally inhabited for 4 decades. his story became a national sensation. He was no longer a fugitive, but a curiosity, a living relic of a bygone era. He wrote a memoir, Hitler's Last Soldier in America, detailing his incredible journey from the deserts of North Africa to the prison camps of Texas and his 4 decades on the run. He became, in his later years, a minor celebrity, giving interviews and lectures about his experiences. He had achieved his ultimate goal. He was finally, legally free. Georg Gärtner, the German POW who had vanished into America, died in 2013 in Loveland, Colorado, at the age of 92, a legal American citizen. His story is more than a simple tale of escape. It is a story of the blurred lines between enemy and citizen, of the long shadow of war, and of the incredible capacity of one man to adapt and survive. It is a testament to a unique moment in American history, when the heartland of the nation became a temporary home to its enemies, and the vastness of the country provided a hiding place for a man who simply wanted to escape the tides of history. Georg Gärtner's 40-year odyssey remains the longest and most successful escape of a World War II POW on American soil. Which POW story should we cover next? A. The Sheriff. B. The Christmas Truce. Comment.